people need to understand the purpose of having things is not just for having things sake, right? I'm currently in the country, and I was discussing here with the person that a older lady who would have known my mother. We were having a conversation about that. She would have used her money throughout her lifetime because she's approaching 70, and she's very appreciative of how she was able to use her money as a tool. We said, she said, Shakila, what is saving up money in a bank right through for? And very few people have that understanding and mentality. Assets such as money, land, houses, they are tools that you are supposed to use and leverage in order to do other things. When you don't own anything, you have nothing to leverage, to mortgage, to leave behind. Nothing. So keeping a rental arrangement and maintaining a tenancy, you cannot carry that land to the bank to mortgage it. You cannot sell it. You can only live on it. And you can live on it subject to the authority, the power, and decisions of the landlord. If in the morning the landlord decides to sell the property, they can sell it with you on it, and you get new landlords. They can decide to discontinue the tenancy based on some tenants agreement. So it will always be it is quite beneficial for a tenant to consider trying to own their lands, because as a tenant, your power over the property is very limited.
Right. And that leads me
it's limited to just occupancy. That's what a renter is.
Yeah. Just to occupy. Now I want to go into that a little bit, because that sounds a little scary for a renter, Miss Daniel. I am on this land 15, 20, my great grandmother was here.
And all they can do is occupy. Right.
But can my landlord just through a process maybe change that like that?
Yeah. Can I just remember, landlord in property law, a landlord often always, sometimes I have never really seen a tenancy agreement where a landlord will give away their authority to sell. But that power of sale is one that remains a landlord indefinitely. And so your tenancy agreement, unless expressed otherwise, rarely ever affects their power of sale. You would just get a new landlord, but it doesn't mean that they cannot sell the lands from beneath you. And that is something that I think most persons do not consider. Now, the Land Tenancy Security of Tenure Act, that piece of legislation is the one we're going to be considering this evening, has made several provisions to recognize and acknowledge certain individuals. The law references there as statutory tenants, to create certain entitlements and rights, and really to dignify these people's tenancy and give them an opportunity to purchase. According to that act, there are certain obligations that the landlord have to acknowledge, such as offering you the ability to sell first or to purchase, right? First, you being entitled to half market value, all these different, but those things still depend. It depends on certain things. It depends on when your tenancy started. The act is not applicable to any and all tenancy arrangements. There's a cap on the year and all of that. So you need to know if, and we're not going to be going into that because that is legal advice. You need to know if you are eligible to benefit from the provisions of the Land Tenancy Security of Tenure Act. We have done webinars on these things before, so you could go back on that and see if you can qualify for that privilege.
Right. So something that jumps out at me very much so is that you on this land, you're paying $300 rent and per year. Right. And owing, and some cases not paying, and you end up in a situation where the landlord passes it on, dies, move, probate, deed that was sent, something happens.
New owner.
And the new owner decide, yeah, what's going on now? And I build this 300 a year. I want to do something else. That is a very uneasy but possible reality, Trinidad and Tobago. It's a very, very uneasy but possible reality, because in the morning you can find yourself in a situation where the land that your great-grandmother was living on, and you inherit the house. Now, what happens to the house? I know the land happened, but I build the house. What happens in a case where change, land tenancy change, we write it in on a paper with my great-grandmother, so it have no real agreement, which is 90, I would say more than 50% of the land rental agreements in Trinidad. We can't find a legitimate bona fide rental agreement written, right? And I build this house, concrete structure, 5-bedroom. What happens?
Right, so this is a reality of many people. I would say more than 75%, more than 80% of the country who have this rented land situation. That is exactly what happens, right? A generation changes, both for tenant and landlord, right? And nobody making sense of this arrangement. The question about the house is interesting. Yes, you are right. Many of these tenancies do not have any written arrangement. So you don't, and so let me choose my words wisely. The assumption is automatically that the house belongs to the person who built it, right? Which would be the tenant, and the land beneath it will be to the landlord. Now, very popular instance, when that happens, you all will have to reach an agreement as to how you want to settle this. Either the value of the house is taken or the value of the land is taken, and the landlord first says, well, I am willing to entertain request to purchase, but so that you have the house and the land together. Let's say if together they are $1 million, you separate the house from the land and you are able to purchase the land that have market value. If the landlord does not want to sell, he will have to compensate the tenant for the structure that you have allowed them to affix on it. Now, if you have reasonably, as the landlord, because some people, they are very audacious, in my opinion.
Right. I want to talk about these people because so far, before you go into it, right, because I like to build what I know a Trinidadian mentality might be.
Yes.
And the Trinidadian mentality might be, my great-grandmother was on this land.
Living here. Nobody can move me.
And nobody can move me because the lawyer say that he has supposed to have rights. They don't know what the rights are, but we have rights. Right. We have rights to land. They're supposed to give you that. Right.
No, so that's absolutely incorrect. As a person like to throw wrong words as adverse possession and stuff. Once you rent in land, or there was ever an arrangement for rent, you and adverse possession have to give up each other one time. Then once you were squatting on the land and you know your grandmother used to pay somebody and you know it is not your land, that very knowledge disqualifies you as being considered in law as a squatter. So you are a licensee at best, right? Or someone allowed to occupy. But we're not even going to adverse possession. We're sticking to your tenant. You know you're a tenant. You feel your landlord can't sell your land. Foolishness. Can sell it in the morning, right? And then your obligation now is transferred to the new purchaser. Now, you need to also understand and remember, nobody really owes you anything. Right? And that's why I said some tenants are very audacious. They have the audacity to insist that not only do they not, so that's when there is the house and the land situation, you cannot hold your landlord at ransom and say that you have to leave my house here and I'm not moving because I don't want to sell the land. No, They can sell the land with your house on it, and if they have reasonably given you opportunities to settle the redress for the value of your house sitting on their land, it can be removed. Once your landlord knows their rights, because tenants are also talking about the rights of the tenant, there are many rights of the landlord as well. And when and if the landlord knows their rights and would have done everything legally possible to facilitate a fair, because the Land Tenancy Security of Tenure Act is a sort of an equitable. So in law, you have law and equity, sort of an equitable arrangement to facilitate this whole tenant landlord situation. But it has to be equally, it is now, even though the legislation, yes, is very much designed to protect the tenant, but it still is fair to the landlord. And so you cannot try to hold your landlord at ransom. You cannot try to unreasonably and unduly refuse to pay people for their land. You want to continue living here for $5, right? And landlords, you also cannot brutally and brandishly eject people from their homes.